So we have this this new book, which I want to read you a little bit from, perhaps as a sort of a start. So going back to my teacher that we mentioned in the beginning there, that's him. That's my teacher, Zen Master Shinzan. He was a very unusual person, even in the Zen world. So a little bit in the forward here, yoga with Zen Master Shinzan. My teacher would usually do his yoga practice in the temple office. As he walked there to join him, shadows would already be lengthening on the gravel garden. Every Zen monk has his work, whether in the kitchen, with the guests, or out in the grounds, and the schedule could change at lightning speed. But often, by late afternoon, the work of the day had largely been done. This pause of an hour or so soon enough shifted into the evening schedule, chanting in the Buddha hall, followed by yakuseki, the simple Zen evening meal of leftovers. Then evening zazen meditation would stretch out into yasa, meaning night sitting, individual meditation out in the gardens and up on the surrounding mountainsides that could go on till dawn. But during this late afternoon break, Zen Master Shinzan would nearly always be practicing what he called Daizan. His yoga wasn't on public display, but neither was it a secret. And this book is my invitation to you to come and join us in the office late afternoon. So we'd find him on the floor, stretching, working energy points, self-massaging, and generally toning up his body. Daizan means moving Zen, which he contrasted with the stillness of zazen, meaning sitting Zen. Unlike other more formal activities, Master Shinzan did his yoga in an incredibly relaxed spirit. Sometimes he'd sit on the floor in a posture while a visiting farmer chatted about the upcoming rice harvest, or a grandma from the village shared her depression, and he'd be looking under his arm and advising these guests. Similarly, we monks were welcome to sit with him and talk, and if we wanted to, we could join in. Master Shinzan never instructed, simply making suggestions. Try like this. He was encouraging, but the actual engagement, was up to you, in keeping with the Zen attitude that the motivation has to come from the student. So it just gives you a little flavor of one of the kind of key sources of this. So what is Zen Yoga? So the person who first developed the name Zen Yoga was a Japanese yoga teacher called Masahiro Oki, who's a very interesting person. He's kind of like the James Bond of yoga. He was a spy in the war, he had all kinds of adventures, and yoga was a big part of it. And his definition of Zen Yoga was delighting the life force. That was sort of what it came down to for him. And I think it works very, very well. Now, in my experience, I spent almost 20 years in various temples and so on, Zen practice places. And they didn't always, or even usually, call sort of, if you like, spiritually inspired movement work Zen Yoga. My teacher, as I mentioned there, he usually called his practice Do-Zen, moving meditation. In quite a lot of temples you'd see it called Dao-In. So Dao-In comes from the Chinese Dao-In, which means guiding and stretching, guiding the energy through the body and stretching. And Dao-In in China has it's got a tradition that goes back, I think it's about 280 BC, something like that, the earliest records. They've dug up a burial mound with a duchess buried in it, a very, very high aristocrat. And she considered this practice important enough that a scroll with movement instructions was buried with her. So it's got a very, very long tradition in China, much older actually than anything we have coming out of India. And over the centuries, Dao-In, this kind of, if you like, awareness-based movement work, became very much a part of Chinese medicine. And a number of Japanese people, particularly monks, traveled to China to learn over the centuries. And one of the things they were very keen on was Chinese medical methods. And so the Dao-In, or the Dao-In, as they pronounced it in Japan, about 1,000 years ago started to come into Japan and became part of general life and part of temple life. And so in some temples you'll see Dao-In as what they call this sort of thing. The most common name is Zen Taiso, which would translate to something like Zen exercise or Zen calisthenics. So various different names that you'll come across. So coming back to the West, if I started calling it Daizan, it was pretty clear nobody would have a clue what on earth it was. So the most accessible name was Zen Yoga. But the sort of practices that I've shared and sort of brought together are about 50% what I've learned in the temples, and then about 50% what I've sort of developed out of that over about 20 years, 25 years maybe, teaching this sort of thing. And so what does it sort of consist of? Well, I think of three key elements, rather like three strands of a rope, each one sort of reinforcing the other two. Now, the first one, the first key element, is physical alignment, the actual sort of placement of the body. And in a sense, we kind of already know about this. If I ask you right now, sit like a miserable, depressed person. Go ahead, go on. Well, we know. In an instant, we know. Now, if we do the opposite, if we say, sit like a sergeant major, like a ramrod, okay, we can do that too. Now, that's a little bit more aware than the sort of depressed position, but of course, because it's got that sort of tension embodied within it, it actually tends not to be very sort of flowing, shall we say. But we can find, and Zen over the centuries has worked a lot with this. In fact, they have a saying in Japan, Igi Soku Buppo. Igi Soku Buppo. So Buppo is the Buddha Dharma, or the truth of things, the reality of things, if you like. Igi is like correct alignment, and Soko is like is precisely. Correct alignment is precisely the truth of things. When we learn how to line up the physicality, we actually align potentially with the truth of who we are, with the truth of reality, if you like. So physical alignment has had a long, maybe 1,000-year history or more within Zen, and this sort of practice very much involves that. And then the mind dimension is very important. So we're all very familiar with the word mindfulness. So the Buddha, when he laid out the practice of mindfulness, he talked about four main objects of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the mind, or the consciousness, mindfulness of the objects of the mind, all the thoughts coming and going, mindfulness of the sensations, the feelings within the body, and then mindfulness of the body itself. So you've got, in a sense, two parallel pairs, the body and what's going on in the body, the mind and what's going on in the mind. Now, the beautiful thing about this is he made it very clear that if we work with any one of those four, we deal with all four. And so, for example, mindfulness of the body, if we apply that with a thoroughgoing spirit, it can take us the whole distance. In fact, he has a saying somewhere, there is one thing that leads to happiness in the present and liberation in the future, and that one thing is mindfulness of the body. So when we not only align the body, but apply this in the moment, non-judgmental presence or awareness, then we're starting to set up something that's potentially really quite potent. And then the third strand within our rope, if you like, is a sense of the energetics. And as I'm sure you know, almost every medical and spiritual system within the world has a sort of a conception of the human organism as having an energetic dimension within it. I mean, we all sort of, if we think about, for example, a high energy person, we instantly know what that means, or a low energy person. It's something we're very tuned in on our sort of awareness level. And so we can actually learn to become very aware of this dimension, and we can use the energetics in association with this in the moment awareness and this physical alignment, each one reinforcing the other two, to create something that's potentially very beneficial on the level of health and well-being, very beneficial on the level of the sort of energy getting through the day, and also very beneficial on the level of consciousness, of awareness, both in terms of what we could call emotional regulation, but then also bringing us into a type of awareness which we could call non-separative or non-opposed, non-dual. We can potentially, through this work, open up a kind of presence which has no opposite, which isn't in the world, or isn't in the game, if you like, of subject and object, me and the world, good and bad, health and sickness, and all this kind of stuff. And as that opens up, we come into a place where we're good. We no longer essentially have problems, where we're essentially fine in life. So the project with the book was to try to bring these levels and make them available for people, so that people could actually, not take my word for it, but experientially feel their way into what it might be to apply these sort of three dimensions of the practice and gain these kind of benefits. Now we have as a sort of a subtitle, Seasons of Transformation. So the imagery of the seasons is very much linked into, as you're very likely aware, it's quite sort of present within East Asian consciousness, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, China, those sort of cultural groupings, where there's a strong sense of, as it were, responding to the seasons. So, for example, when I lived in Japan, we would eat different food in the spring as opposed to in the winter. What you wore, of course, there would be a different schedule a little bit. There'd be a response to the season. And on an inner sort of energetic level, there's a sort of very, very well worked out kind of energetic system that very much connects with the seasons. And there are 5 of these seasons. Almost everything coming out of China, as you probably know, is in 5. Not a good number. Shi is the pronunciation in Japanese, which is death. So they don't like 4s. So almost everything's in 5s. So you have these elements, these 5 elements, the earth, water, metal, wood. You're probably familiar. There's another one. What's the other one? Earth, water, metal, fire. Thanks. Yeah. So the metal one often is kind of linked in with a kind of a wind or sort of one. There's a lot of crossover there. And each of these elements has an association with a particular season of the year. For example, the winter, where we are right now, is very much connected with the water element. And so the thinking, or the kind of sense around it is, when it gets very cold, things tend to get stiff, things tend to get icy. And so the water element is at its most vulnerable in the winter season. We need to keep things warm, we need to work on keeping things flowing, we don't want to get cold trapped in the joints. So the idea with the yoga is that we respond to that. that we actually have a sense of what the demands of the seasons might be, the vulnerabilities within our bodies, and we can actually work with those to, as it were, tune ourselves to be, as it were, optimal within the season of the year. But then there's more to it than that. Of course, we all have the seasons of our life, the spring and the autumn of our actual life course. And within the spiritual journey, there's a sort of a seasonal dimension. And so we have this quote on the back of the book that I'm really fond of, that really sort of underlies the yoga in such a big way. Spring is perfectly spring. It is also transforming into summer. So there's nothing missing within spring. There's nothing missing within the winter. Right now, within the rain, the darkness, being here right now at Watkins, all of this, there is a completeness and a perfection and a rightness that we can find right here. There's nothing lacking. This is it for us. But at the same time, we do live in this world of transformation where, we sat here, long enough, this would become very unpleasant. We'd get very hungry and probably we'd have read everything. We'd even get a bit bored, whatever, And so we have underlying really the whole of East Asian culture and, of course, the whole of the Buddha's teaching, this fundamental principle of change. His claim is that there is nothing without, on any level of reality, that isn't part of this process of change. And so as we bring our attention and come to know our body and mind more deeply through, for example, this kind of practice, what we find is change. And if we stay with that and look into that in a thoroughgoing way, what we find is even that which becomes aware of change is itself changing, even that awareness. And so there comes a point where if you like, the sort of, how could we call it, the sort of unexamined view of life, where I feel very solid. I feel like a billiard ball rolling across the table of life. At a certain point, if we pay attention closely enough and in a sustained enough way, we start to directly realize that we simply are not like that. I'm not a billiard ball, I never actually was. We start to see that I'm more like, should we say, perhaps, I'm more like a dance, perhaps. I'm more like a flow. There's nothing fixed. It's all moving, shifting, changing. Now, when we really get this, the Buddha's term for it is we enter the stream. It's like we fully allow ourselves to, as it were, become part of this stream of life. If you like, perhaps it's a little bit like we become like the flute line in a great symphony. We're just part of this ongoing music that moment by moment is just flowing on, moving, and so on. And when we come into this place, when we come into this entering the stream, we come home. We no longer live in a mindset which is based around essentially, this is me, and that's the world, and it's little old me, great big hostile world. That starts to melt away. We realize that we're home, that we always were. And in the Buddha's scheme of things, this is the, if you like, the first level or the first step into the world of awakening. It's not the whole story. It's a beginning in a sense rather than the end. But the beautiful thing about it is, according to him, if we take that first step, if we become clear enough about how we are, about this ungraspable moment by moment flow that is our life and that is all life, if we plunge in, if we enter the stream like that, he claims that the rest will unfold. It may take longer or shorter amounts of time, a lot of that depends on us, but that it will inevitably sort of lead on. So that first step, even though it's not that difficult to do, is seen as turning a corner in somebody's life. In the Buddha's own language, he says that that's the moment where you become what he calls a noble person. In his view, nobility is not something that you're sort of born to. It's not a matter of parentage or anything like that. It's a matter of awareness. Once you've got this, you join a new family. He calls it the family of the noble ones. And once you become a noble one, then you remain. It's like there's no way back. That's it. And so potentially, the hope is, with this kind of practice, is we can benefit things on that level of health and well-being, on this level of emotional regulation, on this energetic cultivation, and also on this level of awareness, where we can find, as it were, where we belong, our true home, and come into that place. And it's very sad. I mean, I've been in the yoga world, really on the edge, to be honest, but nevertheless sort of touching in a little bit for about 20 years, and it's become terribly boring. It's become very sort of gymnastics focused, and that's great, I mean, I suppose, but it ain't gonna solve anybody's existential problems. I'm just a week back from India. There it's even more unfortunate. There's a paramilitary organization which is 6 million strong, which has yoga as a part of their practice, and it's done with a drumbeat or a whistle and people in uniform, and it's very militaristic, and it's a little bit shocking, to be honest, and it's very present right now. Well, I hope that the book can plant a little seed around some of the wisdom that some of these really amazing teachers from the past have wanted to pass on to us, around what this sort of thing can really offer us. So much more than just a little bit of gymnastics, a little bit of bendy stretchy. So much more than just like, sort of building up health and strength. All of those things are absolutely there, but there's more here. There's so much more. And so the hope is that, as we find this liberation, if you like, on the yoga mat, that naturally comes over into life generally. And I feel that the world has probably never had the need of grounded, awake people that it does right now. And so I'm tremendously grateful that you've been willing to come out in the rain all the way out here to sort of consider this a little bit. So thank you so much for coming down. Now, the plan was not wittering on too much, so that we could have some space for questions or any areas that people would like to kind of unpack or explore anymore, as much as I know. So if anybody's got any points or reflections or anything at all, I'd be delighted to have a go. And then I believe there's some books upstairs which we can sign for you if anybody would like.
So is the tradition in Japan, is it very, so some temples will have the practice, some won't have it, and lessons won't be, monks don't have to come along for lessons? How is it disseminated?
So it's different temple by temple. I don't know if I go on the floor, are you gonna lose me? Okay, well, is this that's invisible?
Yeah, I can't.
All right, okay, so there's a lot of temples where they say, you're going to be spending about a minimum of an hour a day squatting like this. picking weeds. Those Zen gravel gardens, you know, that you see in the books, they're basically babysitters for young monks. Oh, here's Samantha. So this is Samantha right here on the front cover. And thank you so much for coming. Samantha's editor of the book, and you know, very important person, very much involved in our teacher training as well. So anyway, yeah, so there's a lot of temples, probably my guess about 2/3, where they'll say to you, oh, you don't need anything. You've got it all in the daily schedule, you know, just you'll be sweeping the floor, you'll be chopping veg, you'll be down weeding, you know, that's all you need. You don't need any more.
Reiki.
Exactly, yeah. So I'd say about 2/3 of the Zen temples I've experienced are like that. But then there's about 1/3 where they've got some other stuff going on. So, so if we think about a very typical example, there's a temple called Bukokuji up on the north coast of Japan. Lovely teacher up there, he was a kamikaze pilot in the war, had a kind of nervous breakdown right after, had a very, very beautiful now. So maybe 4:30 in the morning, the bell will go, everybody will come into the main hall, it'll be really dark, and they'll have about a 30-minute session in the cold, in the dark, right there, literally first thing in the day, everybody there. I've known temples where they dish out these little sticks, like this kind of size, and little diagrams, and you know, in the break time, you poke around at these little, you know, acu-spots on the body. I've heard in the old records, some places where they would give out moxa, little kind of incense cones. Now I've never seen that in practice, but I've seen drawings of people doing that on the body. So there's kind of like variations, and it's not a big deal. I think it's a little bit like every temple's got its cookbook, but I mean, it's like we cook the veg like this, they cook the veg like this. It's like no big deal, you know. Okay, you're the cook today, you do it like, you know, it's kind of like that. And so often the person leading the practice, it's all just, you know, pretty much random who's going to do it, you know, it's not like a big deal about it, it's just what we do, you know. So it's kind of like that. So personally, when I first got into this, I was stiff as a board. I was playing rugby and I was doing marathons, and I was absolutely gobsmacked at how painful it was to sit still facing a wall for half an hour. Couldn't believe it. And so I started to, you know, try to find something to help things along. And so it became a bit of a study, if you like, a bit of a thread that so wherever I was, I sort of tried to, you know, tap whatever was available in terms of wisdom in that kind of area. But that's just, even now I'm pretty stiff, really, you know, so I'm still working on it.
I mean, the cover illustration reminds me of one of the Qigong positions from the 8 decades.
Yeah. So the term Qigong, as I understand it, is actually a fairly modern term, and it's been applied to this kind of Dao-In work, you know, this kind of, you know, a little bit more sort of older title, together with some other things, really. You know, essentially, Qi or Qi, it's energy, gong, like cultivation, energy cultivation practices. And yes, there's really a lot there, you know, and we're very much trying to sort of build, gather, open up, and sort of store the energy within the body and work with that as part of what's going on there. So absolutely, yeah, very, very, very allied, I would say.
You mentioned the concept of the mind and thoughts,
Mm.
and that's something, I guess that's why I actually came here, because as I'm becoming more aware of myself, going through my spiritual awakening, there was a moment in my life where I knew I was in the train station, and then all of a sudden I was at home.
Mm.
But I couldn't really remember what happened.
Yeah.
So that's when I really understood that if that's how I've been living my life all this time, I just became a little bit scared.
Well, it's such a shame, isn't it? We kind
So
of...
now I'm trying to find a way of understanding what am I? Am I the mind? Am I the aware of the mind, more, yeah.
Well, if we look at this sort of idea of change that sort of underlies all of this, do the thoughts change or not? They change? Does the awareness that notices the thoughts, does that change or not?
Not so much.
Not so much? What about when you're asleep?
Astral travel?
So, well, it's something to examine. So, the Buddha's claim is that it's all changing. Even that which is aware of the change is itself changing. He uses the image of, if you imagine a bonfire, you've got a fire, like an outdoor fire, and then you have a stick which you're using to keep the fire going. You're kind of, now that stick is going to burn down as much as everything else in the fire, but you can still use it as a tool, if you like. So his take is that the awareness or the consciousness is also part of this flow of change. And so when we hold ourselves separate from this universal flow of change, he says that puts us out of touch or out of alignment with the reality of things. When we plunge in and allow ourselves to be one with the flow of change, then he says we come home. Then we don't suffer anymore. Then we find potentially happiness. So, but it's something to check out for yourself. It's really a matter of having a look. Does this change? Does this not change? Does this dimension change or not change? Can you find anything that doesn't change?
So I have very practical. Thank you for your lecture.
Thank you.
I have very practical questions. As you were saying that it potentially can lead to enlightenment, or to non-duality at least, you said that we can consider that as being a potential side effect. Then after there was a step 2, there was what's coming after this state of non-duality, being part of the Dao, and so can you elaborate on that?
Well, so I'm very much still work in progress myself, so
Okay.
anything I can elaborate is probably very small. So my teacher, when I first went to Japan, his website was called not1not2.com. So yes, it is important, I think, to find that place where there's a non-separation, but then we don't even stick there. We don't stick in two-ness nor in oneness. So what have we got left? Well, what we've got left is ultimately, well, the way I think of it, ultimately it's a dance. You don't dance because you want to get somewhere. You don't dance because there's any other reason other than to dance. And within the dance, it's certainly possible to dance well. And if you're anything like me, it's certainly possible to dance pretty badly. But we can, as it were, explore more and more deeply the dance. And I think one way of thinking about it is, if you think about an artist like Picasso, say, he's doing masterpieces at 22 or something, but right through his life he's developing, he's growing, he's exploring new things, he's getting excited about new stuff. Potentially, I think our life can be our artwork, where we can, as it were, learn to dance more and more beautifully for our own benefit, but also potentially for the benefit of others. And I think that's a lot of what that, sort of, if you like, second phase of practice might be about.
The infinite second phase.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you'd like to come and do some Zen Yoga practice with us, I have classes, and so does Samantha, online. So you're Saturday morning, and I'm on Sundays and Thursdays and Tuesdays. Do them all on donations. Don't charge. And then also we train people to be teachers. We've got about 300 Zen Yoga teachers in various parts of the world already. Samantha's got a course starting in London in about a couple of months, isn't it? Something like that. Yeah. So do have a word with her about that if you're interested. It's a beautiful journey, and we do the training very much in the spirit of what we've been talking about. We're not trying to sort of come up with everybody the same. It's more a matter of finding your expression of the truth of the reality of your body and mind in the moment, in this particular situation, and then kind of sharing that and growing with that. So we try to set it all up as essentially a lifetime journey that can kind of grow and develop, you know, as you grow and develop, rather than a kind of a sort of a fixed, cut and dry thing. So we work very much on the principles. If you know the principles, you've got those right, then that way ahead is clear. So it's a really lovely thing to share with people. It's really great fun. It's beautiful. And you know, Samantha's been doing some great work with that. We also have some other books. They all have Samantha's imprint on them, every single one. I'm very lucky. The editor from heaven. Thank you so much for coming down. Thank you.